Oh, there we go. Perfect. So now we're live. Well, gentlemen, welcome. And I teasingly put the header as the 3-time nominated, 1-time winner of Charlie's Awards. I mean, this is a big deal. So I'm pleased to have you on, and I know that your successful game, the Luxembourg game, was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek effort, which kind of brought to light all sorts of commentary online. But we're not going to talk about that today. we're going to talk about your either some upcoming designs of yours or your design process in general, anyway, between the two of you. But off camera, before for everybody else's gratification, we were discussing where you grew up and your access to Avalon Hill games and how that may have inspired your relationship together as buddies to playing games, and then sort of what transpired going forward. So tell us a little. So let's recap for the folks that are joining now. Let's recap a little bit about where you grew up, your proximity to Avalon Hill, and how that inspired your gaming.
Sure. I'll start, and then Dave can kick in.
Yeah, great.
My name's Ryan, and I grew up in a small neighborhood in Baltimore. Baltimore City was composed of all these little neighborhoods back when we were growing up. Anyway, it's changed a lot since then. But I was living in Gardenville, and in first grade, I went to this relatively small Catholic school called St. Dominic's, which was right on Harford Road, Hamilton. And that's where I met Dave first. We met in first grade. So I've known him since, I don't know. He's better with years.
78.
See, better years.
43 years.
Yeah, better years than I am. And we've known each other since then. And, Catholic school, a lot of it was no fun, just hanging out with the nuns all day and trying not to get wrist slapped and everything else. But we did have some time to fool around during recess and lunch and whatnot. And one of the notable times that I really remember at school was, I don't even remember the year. It was 5th grade. Dave, you might know better than me. Something around there.
I would have said upper elementary. So yeah,
5th or 6th grade, something like that.
Yeah.
Playing on the schoolyard with some other friends, and one of our friends brought in Dungeons and Dragons. And I'd never seen it before. I don't think David ever seen it before. And we were just blown away. What is this game? And, how do we start playing in this game? And that was really, I always had played games of various types from a very young age, whether it was Monopoly or Risk or Stratego or any of those types of things. But kind of this more niche market of games I wasn't real familiar with. But that was really what got me really heavy into gaming. Now, wargaming was kind of an offshoot of that for a lot of us. We were familiar with Avalon Hill. We knew the name Avalon Hill because Avalon Hill was literally a mile away from our school. And they were nice enough. I don't know what the connection was or whatnot, but we would get Avalon Hill games donated to the school, and we had this little back cubby, and you could go, and there was a stack of Avalon Hill games.
How awesome is that, right?
Yeah. So we knew a little bit of it.
Very awesome, yeah.
That's the gamer's dream, right? Oh, here, have some free games. Right?
Yes. But I don't remember a lot of war games. I remember more of the family-oriented Avalon Hill games or the war games there. So we had that familiarity with them a little bit, but we really didn't. I don't even know. We knew of Avalon Hill, but I don't even think we knew exactly where it was. Dave lived what? You lived like 3 blocks from it, 4 blocks.
It turns out that it was within walking distance of my house. It was it was literally like 3 or 4 blocks away from where my house was. I had no idea I lived that close to it until a few years afterwards.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's funny. It's funny. Sometimes you go by a place and you go, hang on a second, that's that company, right?
Well, and the weird thing is I guess the reason why that it was so they didn't have any signage out front. No. They were, in fact, it was funny. Avalon Hill printing plant was located behind a gas station. I very vividly remember my mom and dad getting their gas there. And later on, in the early 80s, it closed. Well, it turns out that Avalon Hill bought that property, and but there was never any signs, so you had to know that that was the location. Otherwise, you just saw this, this vacant gas station and thought, yeah, there's nothing there. But lo and behold, the Avalon Hill's right behind it. So,
how about that? Yeah,
so,
that's interesting. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the family games, because my recollection of Avalon Hill is that they didn't really make a lot of war games. It was 1 or 2 a year out of the entire sort of family of games that came out. And you had Family Feud and the outdoor survival game and a fire and all those things. And I had all those games back in the day, and that was all I thought that existed for gaming. And then I got Waterloo from Avalon Hill as my first war game. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I want some more of that stuff. And I started digging around. That's when I found out about SBI, and this is all back in Australia. But we get, there'd be a shelf this big of games, and you said, this is what's available. And I'd see these newsletters and get all excited. It's like, wow, what's the next war? Like, what's that about? All this extra stuff. Yeah.
We had a bit more access than that.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, my local Toys R Us, or KB Toys, or any of those local toy stores, they had stacks of them. And you would go in, you would see stacks of Avalon Hill games. And I don't remember specifically my first one. I want to say it was Guns of August, but I'd played others before then.
Right.
Because I know that our friend Shane had Gettysburg. I definitely remember that, and us going over his house quite frequently to play Gettysburg. Dave, do you remember your first one you had from Avalon Hill?
The first Avalon Hill game I had was actually B-17, Queen of the Skies, the solitaire game. And then after that, I kind of remember. I know I got access in Allies, but I think that was after we had started playing it. So after that, I think probably we're talking. And this is something we mentioned, we were talking about prior to starting the show, that one of the other nice things about being within the vicinity of the Avalon Hill printing plant was that when they would do a warehouse clear out, they must have sent their excess stuff to local game stores in the Baltimore area. So we had access to, really cheap shrink wrap copies of Axis and of Avalon Hill games, and I know through Toys R Us and KB, gosh, I remember I bought whatever they had, so it was stuff like Luftwaffe, Bismarck, Guns of August, Origins of World War World War II rather, and that's just Stalingrad, Russian front. So once I got into it, and thankfully, like I said, with a readily available supply of games to buy, we had plenty to choose from back then. The mid '80s were a good time to be a war game person in the Baltimore area, at least.
So I don't want to dwell too much on your sort of your gaming background and history, because for these designer deep dives, everyone loves to hear how you're coming up with the game designs and what the process is and stuff like that. But I do have a question about your gaming history. Do you feel like when you look back on it today, and you can both answer this question in your own way, but did that inform your design influences or your choices or your level of detail or abstraction that you like based on your early experiences with Avalon Hill?
I think it definitely has. I mean, it's funny because a lot of people look at those Avalon Hill or SPI games and whatnot, and they look at them as somehow being those complex things, complex games to play. But really, most of them were not. I mean, if you really look at them, the bulk of them were a few pages of manual that you could learn quickly, play, and there were some that were lengthier, there was some that were more detailed, obviously. But the bulk of the very popular ones were games that were supposed to be to get more of a mass market into them.
And don't forget,
widen that.
A lot of times you would also have, and this was pretty standard for Avalon Hill, they would have standard rules, which was like the introductory, then like optional, and then the tournament level, which was the advanced. So they gave you that possibility of playing a game at a lower complexity level, which I think, probably back then was where, we kind of gravitated to, just being younger and so forth. So, I would definitely say that helped influence. Plus just the fact that, when you've known somebody for that long and you have a history of doing something, it kind of just makes it that much easier to get into the mind frame when you're doing the design work. And even more importantly, and I think this is where it really comes out, is when we're doing the play testing, because really play testing is just, I guess you could say it's just like going back to 5th or 6th grade. We're playing a game, and trying to figure it out and work through it. And, so there's, all those years of doing that kind of laid that foundation for the work we do now.
Right. Now, Ryan, does your exposure to history, given that you were a history teacher for a long time, has that helped with the 3 games that you've developed so far?
I think definitely. I mean, and
because they're not big topics, right? Brave Little Belgium is a it's a great little obscure topic, and it's an interesting approach to design. Obviously, 1939 Poland's a little bit more. People are well aware of that, and I haven't played that game, so I can't really comment on how efficacious the history is and all that. But nevertheless, right, that those topics, you have smaller topics, and then Little Luxembourg.
No, I think it definitely has. I mean, Dave, in many regards, even though I have the history major. Your major was what, Dave? English?
Actually, it was communication, but I did minor in history.
Okay.
So
there you go. Okay.
He has. In many regards, I think Dave is the better historian of 2 of us. He's very, very, very well read, and sometimes I really rely on him for info. I'll say, hey, what do you think of this? Does this sound, historically accurate, et cetera, et cetera. But Brave Little Belgium was an interesting one for me. When Dave introduced the concept to me, I mean, we were sitting around the WBC a couple of, whatever it was, 2017, 18, whatever it was.
I think it might have been because
it was a while ago.
Percolated for a couple of years.
Yeah, it was a while ago. And he said, oh, I have this idea for a game. Now, you got to remember, I had stopped playing games. There was a period of time where I just thought gaming was uncool, and I had to try to be cool to get the girls and whatever. And that was stupid. But anyway, I stopped playing games.
I went through it. I never
little did we know, right?
Yeah.
Little did we know that now it's the being a geek is just the coolest, sexiest thing ever.
I didn't know. I mean, my wife, she played Dungeons and Dragons when she was a kid. So, I was stupid. But anyway, that's not the point. I stopped playing games. And then after high school, Dave and I went to 2 different high schools. We kept a little bit in contact then, but then we lost contact, and then really didn't get back together until Facebook, and right. He had a chance to contact me on Facebook. And I started playing games again, but not war games, more mass market games, more Euro games, car racing games, rail games, things like that. And it wasn't until the WBC, like I said, 5 years ago or so, that Dave and I sat down, and Dave said, well, why don't we go ahead and play some older games? And we pulled out Africa Core, and
we were
FBI's
probably playing
Leningrad, and
we were in the open gaming section. It was hysterical because I think we were the only ones playing a game that old, and it even drew some people to say, oh, you're playing a classic. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's fun. Okay, is it the definitive statement on the war in North Africa? Of course not, but it's still fun to play. Especially we haven't played it to death. For somebody that may have played it 100 times, okay, fine, then maybe it's not so much fun. But we were having fun with it, and that was the important part, is that it was easy. We were enjoying it, and I think for Ryan, it was kind of a breakthrough to say, hey, it's like war games are enjoyable. You know,
right.
They don't have to be a rules slog, you know, to go through.
Right. I think Avalon Hill was smart with the tournament rules. You know, that gave folks an opportunity to play the game many, many times, and they're thinking about the games all the time. So they're always thinking about Avalon Hill, always thinking about how to optimize their moves and what they can do or can't do and things like that. I think that was a pretty smart idea. I don't know who started the cons, the World Wargaming Championships and all that, whether Avalon Hill used to sponsor them or
that was Don Greenwood, actually.
Was it? Yeah. Okay. So
I'm pretty sure that was his brainchild when it was Avalon Con.
When it was Avalon Con.
Okay, right. There you go.
So you gotta go back a little earlier to Origins.
Origins was more. I thought that was SPI, but
originally not. It was pitched by a couple different people to Don, and it came out of that. And it originally was in Baltimore, and then it migrated and changed and everything else. But then
we didn't get any of that in Australia, so I was just what's WBC? What's this die rolling stuff?
Yeah. But it was that WBC was actually very influential in several ways because it got me back into war games. The games we played, I think, really influenced Brave Little Belgium because we were playing Africa Corps and we were playing Leningrad. And there's even an aspect of Leningrad that's in Brave Little Belgium. And so that was when Dave was telling me, he's like, I got an idea for a game. Now I'd already had created one small little game by that point. I always wanted to create games ever since we were playing games back in 5th grade. You know, I would always work up variations of role-playing games. I always wanted to make games of some sort. But I'd already made a card game called Space Race by that point. It's never been published. It's actually a very decent game. It just has never been published.
It's a lot of fun, actually.
It's just a 4-player game, kind of trick-taking game on the space race. 2 people representing the U.S. and 2 people representing the Soviet Union, and they're competing to, get to the moon.
Right.
And so, Dave had come to me and said, "Well, I have this idea for a game," and Dave had spent your honeymoon. It was a vacation you had with your wife.
Actually, it was in '93.
Okay.
I was in college. Kathy and I had only been dating. That's my wife. We had been dating. We started dating in '91. And in '93, our 2 best friends, who were also a couple, they happened to be studying abroad for a year in Leuven, Belgium. So we had an opportunity to go spend a couple of weeks in Belgium. And, we went to Paris. We went to a couple spots in Germany. We actually went to Luxembourg City. So I've been in Luxembourg. But the funny thing was that I kept seeing a lot of while we were in Belgium itself is obviously there were a lot of war memorials and a fair share for World War II, but there were many, many more for World War I. And it got me to thinking about just the whole notion because as we mentioned earlier, I had Guns of August at a pretty early age, and while I know it's not a lot of couple people's tea, it did turn me on to World War I, and I was always very interested in that conflict. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do a game that looked at the very first few weeks of the war? Because when you say World War I, everybody thinks trenches and gas masks and static warfare. But you forget that it started out as a war of movement. And, Belgium, most of the time it just gets mentioned as, the Germans invaded Belgium and then there was the Battle of the Marne and then, the trenches started. But the Belgian army and the Belgian people actually put up a pretty good fight. They didn't stop the Germans, but they certainly didn't just step aside and let them walk through Belgium either. And it interested me to the point where I thought, I think this would make a really cool game to say, okay, how would you, as the Belgians, try to slow the Germans down, knowing that you're probably not going to stop them, but at the same time, give enough resistance to hold them up. And I thought about that. That was 1993, and I put that away in a mental file cabinet in my brain, and it just kind of sat there for 25. I would say 25 years because I think it was like 2017 or 18 that I brought it up to Ryan at that WBC, just an off the cuff remark, and then that's when that's where we picked back up with Ryan, who then literally ran with that idea.
Right. And you ask about the history, and that's where I was getting to was, I spent a lot of time both in U.S. history and World War III teaching World War I, probably more time than I was supposed to, frankly, because it was a war that I enjoyed teaching about. And I think now they might spend a day or something, but I would spend at least a week, and we would go over it, and we would spend a lot of time just on that beginning portion of the war. Just really talking about the Schlieffen Plan and what it was and what it was supposed to do and how it worked and what actually happened and what happened when the Germans did enter Belgium and that sort of stuff, and what was the difference a little bit between that war with the war of movement, as he says, and the more of the trench warfare. So I actually did talk about that a lot. So when he said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that interests me. That's something that I would like to approach and do. I had no idea what to do. Like I said, I had created a card game, but the concept of a war game was something very, very different. So I, as I might have told you off camera, have not only a background in history, but a background in video production and graphic production. So I kind of fell back on what I'm good at and said, well, I don't really know what to do. So let's start by making a map. Because I don't really know what to do with this thing, but I'm just going to make a map of Belgium. Right. And so that's what I did. I started researching maps, looking at maps. I mean, I knew the history generally, but I just wanted to get a map made. And then I said, well, where do I go with this? And I was like, well, I don't really want to make this a Hex Encounter game. And I don't think Dave ever really thought of it as did you ever think of it as a Hex Encounter game?
I think in the very, very beginning, and we're talking actually when I'm on the ground in 93, that was probably the first thing I thought of, because one, that was during a period where I wasn't necessarily out of war games, but I was still playing them, but mostly like traditional Hex Encounter stuff. So at the time, I was probably thinking that, but by 2018, 2017, you had Paths of Glory, you had area movement games. So yeah, the idea was no longer embedded that it had to be a hex.
Sure, right. Hex and so I think it's interesting to choose point to point too, given the scale and all the rest of it. So you got that. So that's interesting. Let's talk about the map for a second, because the final product. Now, did you work through all the way on the final product, or did you hand off to an artist, or how did that happen?
Yeah, no. So I did a prototype. I did a mock-up of it, and it looked very, very different than what the final map did look like. I mean, originally mine was really complex. It had point to point. It had
we had rail and
we had line for rails. We had trails, line for roads, trails, like any which way you could think to get the Germans over, and it was way complex. And we handed all that off to Amabel and Mary over at Hollenspiel. And they hired a fabulous designer who unfortunately is retired from map making at this point.
She no longer makes maps, but
I'm going to slaughter this name, but it's Anya Ziakolska.
Oh, Anya. Yeah.
Anya.
Absolutely gorgeous. It was just absolutely gorgeous. Now, let me just interrupt here. Yeah, no, she did a beautiful job. But let me just say before we go any further, Ryan does an exceptional job with his components. And not to take anything away from anything that we've had published, but I think one of the things that always astonishes people, particularly publishers, when we solicit our stuff, is that Ryan puts out a very high quality prototype. When he shows off his prototype, you almost want to think, wow, is it published? And it's like, no, it's just because he's that good at what he does. And I think that's always been a big help for Selling Point, because the joke was going around that I think it was Mark Herman, drew on like loose leaf paper or something, and that's how he does his designs. Ryan is very good at doing the graphic then. So that helped a lot. That was
right. It sounds like Ryan's, and we'll kind of talk about Ryan right here.
Right here.
But he a very visual person, right? Yeah. And also Simonich comes to the table and says, "Hey, look, I had this idea," and GMT says, "Oh, go ahead," right? Whereas with you guys, if you took a title to GMT and you're two relative nobodies, you've never made a game before, you don't have any street cred, so it's good to bring what looks like a finished game or a high quality prototype to the table. Well, you put the work in, it's playable, all the rest of it. So okay, so with the map, you chose point to point, and we've got Anya's glorious artwork. In fact, let me see if I can just, because everyone,
that was later. That was much later though.
Yeah.
I mean, we really only had a map. We had not much more than that. I mean, I made some counters.
Right, you made the map. We came up with the order of battle.
But there it is.
There it is. Yep. But imagine at the time of the design when we first started that what you're looking at. I mean, obviously, it's a polished product, but when Ryan and I started, all we had was literally a map and counters. We had no mechanics whatsoever. So
let's talk about that. Let's talk about the mechanics. And first, did you start with, well, what was the end goal? I think, Dave, you mentioned that you wanted to, obviously not, and maybe the Belgians can actually stop the Germans, but you wanted to represent the historical flavor of the Belgians trying to slow down the German pass through of Belgium via the Schlieffen plant, and then how did you decide? Did you decide on the victory conditions first, what the metrics needed to look like, or did you get into mechanics first?
That's a good question. I think literally all I had was a map and counters.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what to do with it, and I basically said, "Dave, here it is. Have fun."
And
at first, I mean, I didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
it was his idea. I said, "Here's a map. Here's some counters. What do you want to do with this? Take it. Try to figure something out."
Right. I think what I was more interested in was obviously, again, being a big World War I fan. I do have a lot of 1914 Western Front games. Obviously, 1914 by Avalon Hill. There's a great design by Joe Miranda. It's Reinforce the Right. It showed up in a Strategy and Tactics number of years ago. Ted Rachers put out his. Ty Bomba has a version. A lot of guys have done games where they cover pretty much from the start of the war through, say, either the Battle of the Marne or maybe up to as far as like October of 1914, the Race to the Sea. What I wanted to focus on was to dial it back and narrow the focus to just the first 3 weeks in Belgium itself. And obviously you don't want to create something that's totally a fantasy or ahistorical, but the object that I just wanted to show is that the Germans actually had to do some fighting to get through Belgium, that the Belgians weren't just a pushover, and that there was something gameable there. And it's funny because I think this wasn't what we started out with, but what we ended up with, I think, was what we call the kind of the theme that we have behind this is the David and Goliath, I guess if you want to call it a series, because you have this tiny nation, fighting against this superpower, and yet, holding their own, because the title itself, Brave Little Belgium, comes from how the country was represented in those first weeks by the press, particularly the British press. There's a famous cartoon of, it looks like a big German with a stick and a little boy with, and it's like, bravo, little Belgium. It's the idea of the plucky Belgians, fighting against the Germans. So that was what I wanted to convey. But the question was, how do we do it? And then this is where I think it really evolved with Ryan and I kind of just playing it through, and me bringing the experience I had with games with Ryan's sense of creativity and his ability to flesh things out.
Yeah.
And I think that the combination of that, we both bring our strengths to these designs, and I think that's why we work so well together. I always joke that, and I'm dating myself here, we're kind of like Daryl Hall and John Oates. I'm the John Oates to Ryan's Daryl Hall. He's the front guy. He's the the one you hear from, and I kind of work in the background. But we really rely on each other, and it's great. I if I can just jump ahead for a moment to our second design, which was White Eagle Defiant. I was pretty skeptical of the idea of a Poland 1939 game because, again, there had been a few. Ty Bomba had done one, and there was a couple others. But really, I thought, well, that's not, you're not going to get as much fun out of that. But then when I researched it and looked at the history, again, you see that whole idea of, okay, yeah, you want to say, it was the foregone conclusion. But again, there was that whole notion of people fighting against the odds to defend their country. And again, Ryan sold me on that concept, and with his help, led me to see that this was not only something that was gameable, but could be a lot of fun. And I remember particularly one play test, because we had a lot of play testing through Vassal. We would play online together. And I remember one playtest we got finished, and I'm like, "Damn, this is a fun game." This is cool. Really, yeah. So that's what I think is really cool, is that Ryan he's very dogged in that way. He's determined to find something, and he found in this game a subject that I didn't think was going to be workable, but actually was a heck of a lot of fun. And I think that's part of what makes it so enjoyable. It's an evolution.
Yeah. So in the design phase for the mechanics, how did you settle on the combat routines? And obviously movement can be relatively easily worked out because you're going from point to point, and you're either moving one space or two spaces or whatever. But so I'm assuming combat mechanics would have been interesting. And I know we're now. Let me flip back to.
We're back to Brave Little. So I like I said, I had kind of turned it over to Dave, and there was kind of a long period where we didn't do anything on it, and not his fault, not my fault. It's just life come about, and everything kind of hit at once, and it sat for about a year, I would say.
Just a year, yeah.
And I finally grabbed it and said, I need to do something with this, and I think
you saw something that and I forget what it was, but you got inspired, and you're like, you know what? We need to get
working. Yeah.
And we did. Yeah.
So I just what I did was I took back the board. I revised the map a little bit. I said, I'm just going to throw some numbers onto counters. I'm going to throw some movement numbers based on a little bit of research, just based on let's try to experiment. Sure. I'm going to throw some simple attack. I kind of did a little research, and I said I want to do a kind of a bucket of dice type thing. And let's do some simple attack. And I kind of thought with some logic as regards why this one would be a roll of 5 and why this would be a roll of 4, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, Dave, here we go. And we kind of knew we needed to have certain aspects of the game needed to happen. Like we knew that the Germans needed to destroy the forts at Liège and Namur. I mean, that was a given. That was a big focus of that battle. We knew that had to happen. And we knew that the Germans would have to get so far in the game, so far across the map in order to then start piercing their way into France. We knew that had to happen. So, I mean, we had some of that kind of basics to it. I don't know if we had the whole yet, like whether it would be a win, draw, or loss type thing yet. I don't know if we had all that done. But we just had some basic stuff. And for us, sometimes it's just put it on a map and move those counters around.
Right. That was kind of, I think the idea of the victory conditions came a little later.
I think they did too.
I think what really helped lend itself, though, to this game was the idea of the whole notion of war by timetable, which is what the Germans were on. They were on, by day 15, they had to be in Brussels. By day 20, they had to be here. So that kind of helped. And in fact, I think that was one of the main reasons why we ended up with the victory line, that the Germans have to get at least one non-cavalry unit across, because it's the whole notion of the Germans have places to go. They can't be wasting time in Belgium. And I think, we played around with the idea until finally we came up with what felt like a good stretch of time that would give both sides enough time to, do what they needed to do. And,
right.
That's kind of how the victory.
And is that what drove the 2-day time cycle for turns, or like why weren't you doing a 1-day turn or a 3-day turn? What was the catalyst?
Yeah, this is a 3-day turn cycle.
Oh, I'm sorry, it is a 2-day turn. Yeah. So
that's okay. I wanted to keep the game brief. I did not want a elongated game.
Yeah.
And kind of at the same time that we're pushing counters along and trying to figure out what we're going to do with this, I had this weird epiphany, which was not an epiphany at all because it had been done 1,000 times in games, but my, in some regards, lack of knowledge about games was a good thing. So like everything that Dave and I had played and everything that I had been used to was, I go, you go type stuff. And I'm sitting there one night and I'm like, what if we had some sort of, chit that we pulled and that indicated that, you could then activate this particular unit and then that would drive the units across the field and whatnot. And maybe some special events you pull, et cetera, et cetera. And of course I called Dave and he goes, oh, that's chip pull. Yeah, that's great. That's been done, ad nauseum, but yeah, that's a good idea. And, so some of these things just kind of came because I had these little brainstorms and I called Dave, asked him about them. And then, and so that kind of came in. Again, we didn't want to make it too long. Dave already knew like he wanted to end by a certain time. I knew
right.
like when the Germans had to be to a certain place by a certain time. So when I was creating kind of the turn chart there at the bottom, the turn track, I then kind of took what he had and then divided it into so many days and said, well, let's try this. Let's try 3 days. Let's see if that works. And then we might have tried some others. I don't recall, but we tried different ones.
I think the turn cycles came pretty quickly. I don't think we spent a lot of time with that. I don't recall anyway.
Right.
But, yeah.
But then that chip pull that went mechanic in then fit right in real well with the turn track because then we put in the end of turn markers into the chip pull as well, which then, drove that whole mechanic and the speed of the game, making it into a 45-minute game. If we had done, 1 day per turn, something like that, then obviously it would have been a much longer game. And we were trying to avoid that. We were really trying to keep to the 45. And I think one of the things that we have to remember is that at the same time that kind of all of this was going on, that we were creating this and we were trying to figure out how to move things around, and the chip pull idea came and the turn track idea came. I was looking at a lot of Holofield games. They were relatively new at the time. I was reading a lot about them, and I thought a lot what they were doing was cool, and I thought it was really interesting. And so when I was making this game, I kind of was at the same time thinking, let's make this for them. So the size of the map, the number of the counters, I really kind of gravitated towards what they did in the design of this game. Because I really wanted
the footprint of the game really did coincide with the way they did
and I think they went through a period of like massive innovation. They brought out a lot of very interesting titles with some innovative mechanics and on a very, very tight set of counters. It was either 1 or 2 counter sheets, and it's been nearly always one map, and it was no more than 10 pages of rules. So you had almost like a S&T style magazine format. Here's what it all needs to fit in a box this big,
right?
Map no bigger than this, rule book. Yeah, so that's interesting that you were shaping your viewpoint to that.
Right? I've always been a fan of small footprint games. It just simply because most of the time, particularly now, if I do gaming, it has to be something that fits on a relatively small space. So to me, what we were doing kind of fit the kind of game that I enjoyed. Plus the whole notion that when we were doing it, we were thinking, this would be a great game that I think would be a good intro game for people who have maybe not been exposed to the wargaming genre before.
Right.
But yet at the same time, it's still, there's still enough there to appeal to people who are more, familiar with war games. And I think we were very fortunate. And again, I give most of the credit to Ryan that we were able to come up with a design that I think really satisfied that I think it's enjoyable by both people who are new to the hobby and people who are experienced. So
Well, and it looks like it goes down to the wire too, as Matthew was saying.
I was just going to say Matt Hudson's comment, and he's absolutely right. I think that's what makes these games so fun is that you want to. One of the things that I enjoy is when you play a game that it goes to the end. Some games you play for a while, like particularly, and I'm not picking on this topic, but Battle of the Bulge. After a while, if the Germans haven't gotten so far, you're like, all right, well, they're not going to win. We'll put the game away. Right. Same thing if the game plays too long and you don't have time to finish it. And I think that's the beauty of this game and White Eagle Defiant as well, is that you can play it in one sitting. And if you're really good, you can probably play, you can play it once and then switch sides and play it again, and I think that's a great thing too, is that it's very, I think there's a very satisfying feeling to play a war game to the end, it's because a lot of times you don't. So to have something you can do that with is, I think, always a nice thing to have.
Yeah, so by the time we had like the basic mechanics and the chip pull and the turn track, there was definitely some things missing, and we knew it, but it was enjoyable at that point, and we played a couple times and we had a fun game. But there were some things that just weren't working. Like, for example, the fact that the Germans really had no opportunity to move if the 3 end turns were drawn. And I remember playing a sample game with my good friend Sean Drullinger. He's also the designer of Point Blank that's coming out from Lock and Load. And he gave me some good advice. He's like, you have to have some way for the Germans to move. You want to make sure that the players have a continued agency in the game. They have the ability to do something in the game. And I didn't know quite what to do with that. In addition, I don't know that we had the Guard Civique in there quite yet. So it was mostly just the Belgian units, and then the German units, and the French and the British. And so I kind of looked around at a couple things and kind of had some late night brainstorms. For some reason, a lot of my
I was just going to say that seems to be your thing, is that you seem to wake up in the middle of the night, literally with like, hey,
I do. Yeah, I did, and I came up with the atrocity mechanic literally in the middle of the night. Right. I needed to come up with something to give that player the agency so that they can move. And I also wanted to come up with some way to simulate what the Germans were doing when they were moving through the country. And those two things combined into one. And it was literally, I was laying in bed one night and came up with it. And I think I might have texted Dave that night and said, hey, I got this idea. What if the Germans can continue to move after the 3 end turns are pulled, but there's a chance that they might, by forcing their soldiers in quickly, that they're going to commit atrocities, et cetera, and then that could be an end game mechanic as well. And that just molded itself right into the game, and it just tried it and worked great.
It
allows the player to make a choice there, right? So
it is. Right. It's a bit of a push your luck kind of aspect,
And I love push luck games, and so I think that was probably somewhere in the back of my head too. And then the Guard Civique goes straight back to Leningrad. Goes straight back to
untried units.
Yeah, the Panzer Group Guderian type system.
And
I thought right back to that. I'm like, I want to have untried units, which is what they were, but I also wanted to have some variability in the game. I wanted it to be where these Guard Civique might pop up in some place. They might not pop up. Maybe they support their little town. Maybe they don't support their little town, which historically was pretty accurate. And so the random little setup that occurs at the beginning of the game with the Guard Civique all came out of that. And so by that time, it was pretty much complete. But Dave and I, we put it on Vassal, and we just sat there and played solo game after solo game after solo game after solo game. And then we would together and play in person until we felt like we really had it. And at that point, when we felt like we really had it, I contacted Hollenspiel and just cold contacted them. They didn't know who I was. And sent them an email and said, hey, I have this game. I checked their website to see what they were looking for, what the rules and policies for submissions were, which I highly suggest anybody if they're going to submit something. And I sent it to them, and they said, wow, this sounds really interesting. Can you send us the rules? And I sent them the rules. And it was strange because right about at the same time, I got a contact from another company saying they were interested in the game from through a friend of mine. And I was like, oh, what do I do now? Because I really wanted it to go to hospital. That was always my kind of goal. And so I was like, do I let them know that I'm, I actually we ended up getting an offer from another company. And so I was kind of torn. I'm like, will they think it's kind of manipulative if I kind of contact them and let them know that I already got a offer? So I was honest, and I let them know what was going on, and they said, "Oh, just we read the manual. We really like it. Can you send us the copy of the game, et cetera, et cetera?" I said, "Okay," and I sent them the game, and they, were thrilled by it and made us an offer within a day. And I was in shock. The fact that we got 2 offers.
Yeah.
As someone who's never published a game, and the fact that the company that I've wanted, my first choice company to publish the game, made us an offer.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, I don't want to.
And I think
that doesn't happen.
I was going to say we were fortunate in that regard, and we were also fortunate in that our experience with both companies, with Hollandspiel and the other company, were both extremely positive. Both, very, very, obviously Amabel and Mary are just awesome people. We wouldn't be here if it wouldn't have been for their belief in us,
right,
and their support, because they were taking a risk. Obviously, we were unpublished, so they could have published it and it could have been a flop, but they went ahead. They saw in the game kind of what we saw, but they saw a little bit more, and were able to polish it to where it became what it is now. But I think we were fortunate in that our experience, we didn't, I know we're relatively new, but being new, we were the people we dealt with were respectful and very generous, and it was nice. It was about as good as experience as you could hope for when you're trying to shop around your first design.
Yeah,
It was all in all. I mean, it really turned out.
That's awesome.
Beautifully. Yeah.
So what's next for the two of you? Did you have something in mind for a third? It'll be a fourth title if we account the award-winning Luxembourg.
I actually have something in mind that I haven't even told Dave about.
This would be fun.
Yeah, I have lots of things that I've been working on here and there, and I'm always trying to find the one that's going to, grab Dave's attention, because half the time, if I know I grab Dave's attention, then I'm going to grab other games' attention, and we're going to get going. We definitely have a game in the works. We did Bravely Belgium, we did White Eagle, and we have another game in the works in that David and Goliath series. But I've been getting a lot of calls for the deluxe version of Lucky Little Luxembourg, Dave. I haven't exactly told you this.
Well,
I did create a deluxe version at one point. The
does it have 2 counters instead of 1?
The game has 3 counters, Dave, I believe.
Wow. And this is going to be 4-inch counters, right?
Yeah. There you go. So the original game obviously is a little postcard, and I did make a deluxe version at one point where I put in a little Ziploc bag, and I made a nicer map, and I put a cover in and put actual counters that were cut and a custom little die and everything, and a handwritten note. I did, but I'm thinking it might be time for a deluxe box version of Lucky Little Luxembourg, and I actually have some people that keep demanding it. So that would be for sale, though.
Yeah, and that would be very funny, because actually it's funny, when we were in Belgium, my wife and I, all those years ago, I had always been fascinated by Luxembourg because it's such a small country. It's just the small country that really gets overlooked in just about every history you talk about. Usually it gets one line if it gets that, and I was like, well, I really want to see it. So we actually, it was really very funny. Our friends, when we were in Belgium for those 2 weeks, our friends had something to do where it was just Kathy and I, my wife and I, and then my girlfriend and I. We had a day to ourselves, so we took a day trip to Luxembourg City. We took a train from Leuven down into Luxembourg. I got to see the Ardennes. We actually, because the train went through, and in fact, I'll never forget, it was actually kind of moving. There was actually on the train to Luxembourg City, there was actually an American World War II vet who was on his way to visit Bastogne, and he happened to be on the same train. So that was just fascinating. But I got to go to Luxembourg and see it, and it's just if anyone ever gets a chance, it's a beautiful little country. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and so I've always joked that my dream was, in most games, Luxembourg and the strategic scale is 1 hex. Third Reich, it gets, I think it gets 5 BRPs if it gets any. I always joked that I wanted to do like a monster game, a 4-map, 1,000 counter game of Luxembourg, just because I love it so much that it's just such a tiny country, and even though it was occupied in the day, I still feel like there's history there. And you know what, Matthew, I actually wanted to go to Verdun while we were there. Unfortunately, the train timing did not work out, so I didn't get to go. One day I would love to go back and hopefully see the battlefield of Verdun.
Very cool.
But anyway, so yeah, I've always just been fascinated by that country. So the joke with Lucky Little Luxembourg was the idea that, everybody, it came from the premise, I think, of the world's simplest war game, which is, 1 hex, 1 counter. And it's like, roll a die, 1 through 5, you win, 6, roll again. And that was kind of where, we were playing with that, around with that idea.
Right.
But it actually, it's tongue in cheek, but at the same time, I have a great deal of respect for Luxembourg, and I think it's a beautiful little place. And so I've always wanted, I wish there was something more that could be done with it. So that's just the aside to the background to our award-winning freebie.
So there you go. And I'll probably use that as a segue to wrap up, because I know that you guys are celebrities now, and we've got to be polite with your time. And having actual Charlie winners on the big board doesn't happen very often. We're sort of the pariah of the board gaming community. So I appreciate you taking the time and being on with us, and I'm looking forward to what comes next in the David versus Goliath series. It was really interesting to hear.
Yeah,
you're thinking about this. So are you going to try and turn that? So will that be systematic? Because the Poland game looks very different, and I haven't played the Poland game yet.
Right.
So it looks different mechanically, and the map and the counters look slightly different as well.
Yeah.
So. Is it a system that you're looking at, or really just topical for the series?
There is some systematic stuff to it, and there are some similar mechanics to it, but you have to kind of change them a little bit to fit within the context. Within the context of that particular battle. The new one, which it's got a new name. Originally, we titled it "Last One Standing." Is completely different topic. It's a topic that doesn't exist. A science fiction game. And what that came out of the concept of the fact that we wanted to do a science fiction game. We wanted to do a game where aliens attack the United States or aliens attack the world or whatever, but we didn't really have much there. And at the same time, we wanted to do another one of these David versus Goliath, Brave Little Belgium type system games. And so one day I was sitting there thinking, well, why don't we just combine the two together? And I came up with this idea of an America in 2050 devastated by global warming, in which the earth has warmed up so much that the cities on the coast are no longer there. They're basically these forts with like big high seawalls around them.
Right.
I think if you've seen The Expanse in New York, you kind of get a feeling of what I'm talking about.
Sure.
And where it warmed up so much that these bugs that we never knew existed, giant ones under the earth, bore up in the west, basically destroy the entire west all the way up to the Mississippi, drive all the humans back. There's some humans like just on the edges of the Mississippi, but pretty much the rest of them are over the Mississippi. And the Americans, the only way they will stop them was with this big, what I call the fusion fence on the Mississippi. And that was like the concept. And then I said, well, great. Now I got this fence. Well, what charges the fence? Well, little forts are charging the fence at all the different key cities along the Mississippi. Well, what did the bugs need to do? Well, they got to destroy the forts. Well, that's getting kind of similar to Brave Little Belgium. What are there little National Guard units? Well, yeah, let's have them popping up in certain places. Well, that's similar to Brave Little Belgium with the Guard Civique. But it then differed. a lot with some of the other mechanics because we weren't going to throw in atrocities, we weren't going to throw in the blitzkrieg breakdown that's in the White Eagle Defiance. So we came up with this push your luck nuclear weapon option where the Americans can throw nukes at them, but too many nukes, you might destabilize the world and the end of the game. And the bugs can shake the ground and drive these tremors through the earth, earthquakes. But too many, and it destabilizes and it destroys the world. So that was kind of that push your luck.
Yep.
Yeah, that we kind of liked from the other one. So we kind of took pieces from Brave Little, and there's some pieces from White Eagle, but also simplified for an audience that may be useful a sci-fi game and a war game.
Right. And, and be a much broader appeal too.
Yeah, so and that was the concept. That was really the concept. And it definitely had a 1950s kind of sci-fi movie feel to it.
We grew up on the UHF, VHF channels showing 1950s B horror movies, monster movies late at night.
Yep.
So this is kind of like an homage to that genre.
You guys should chat to Heilman Lutman. He's done a lot of solitaire games, right? In that genre. It's pretty cool.
He has several good ones. Yes.
Yeah. So that's good.
So that's the next one, and we pitched it to a publisher, and they came back and said we like it, but we need a couple things. And that was an interesting experience for me because with White Eagle and Brave Little, we really didn't have to do a lot of modifications and changes.
Not big ones, no. This one, they did change. I wouldn't say it was fundamental, but they added an element which ended up in the end, I think, being very critical to helping make the game a little more competitive.
Yeah, they suggested doing reinforcements for the Americans. And so I had to kind of think about how I wanted to do that. And we added some reinforcements that do possibly come in. And it's a chit draw game. So again, the reinforcements may come in depending on how you draw the chits or not. And
kind of like White Eagle Defiant with the Russians.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, we kind of took from column A, some from column B, and created this new game. So
it's going to be fun, and the company
it's very tongue-in-cheek. Yes,
it's tongue-in-cheek. The company's in the process of hiring an artist to do the cover and do the counters and do the map and all that. The big bugs, the screaming.
Right. So it sounds like you could be in the running for the Sci-Fi Charlie next year. Is that right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think that would be the genre. Yeah, this I guess this would be. Yeah,
you'll be a Pan Charlie winner and nominee. That'd be awesome.
There we go. It won't be 2021, unfortunately. We're not going to have it in 2021 unless I can release something really quickly. Won't be till 2022.
Right.
But still, that's something to keep an eye out on. And then Dave and I have just started working on another game, which is not in the Brave Little Belgium series at all.
It's a departure. We're trying something new. And in fact, we're getting together this week actually to kind of throw some ideas around and brainstorm.
Very cool.
But you know, I think again the focus will be on playability and enjoyability, but keeping it historical. So it may not be a series game of the David and Goliath, but who knows? It may be the start of another series. So we're
I think it will be.
I think so too. I think it could very easily be, but we're in the very early stages of it.
Well, once that progresses, let's have you back on and talk about the design philosophy and the progress there. That'd be very cool.
I'll just give you a little insight. It is strategic World War II.
Yeah.
All right.
I won't say more than that at this point.
Yeah. With a twist.
With some twists.
With a twist.
With a twist. Perfect. All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
And, thank you for having us. Really appreciate it.
Very cool.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Appreciate that, too.
Take care.
Take care.